Hello, everybody again. I will introduce you the framework of this webinar series that some of you know well already. So it started at the beginning of this year. It's meant to address radioactive waste management and transparency or public participation. The focus of this, of course, it's a frame under NCW umbrella. It's meant to address cases, national cases on early or advanced programs of radioactive waste management in both large or small inventories. So it will tackle management of spent fuel and radioactive waste, current development and judicial situation, but also how transparency and public participation are applied, following the criteria of Aarhus Convention and BEPR report. This report done by NCW, adding a fourth pillar to information, participation, and access to justice to the Aarhus Convention, with a pillar on access to resources. And this series then was introduced by Nadia Zaleznik, our chair, with an overview of good and bad example on those cases, a general overview. And this is available on Nuclear Transparency Watch YouTube channel. You can find the recording as you will find this one. And it went on since January. With the first case presented by Johan Swan on Sweden, then on Denmark by Niels Henrik Huge, then in April by Benoît Jacquet on France, and on the Netherlands by Jan Naverkamp, United Kingdoms by Colin Wells, and today we have the Greenwich case with Greenlick case by by Niels Henrik Huge. And we have three remaining national cases, one by Michel Daniska on Slovakia, one, hopefully, I have to confirm this, on Germany with Rebecca Arms, and the last one on Czech Republic, Czech case by Anna Konvalinkova. So it's mid-month every time. So in 1 month would be the next one. That's it for now. And this is coming from the European Research Program, EURAD, in which civil society is involved in a specific work package on roots. And we've been studying those cases during the work of this work package, and a specific deliverable will be published in the coming days regarding those cases. So with that, I can give you the floor, Niels, and you can present the case. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for this introduction, Malcolm. I'll just put my slides on the screen. So the topic of my presentation is transparency and public participation in Greenlandic radioactive waste management. Perhaps I should very briefly say a few words about myself. I'm from NOAA, Friends of the Earth in Denmark. We have been active in Nuclear Transparency Watch for 4 years. I'm a member of NOAA's uranium group, which was founded almost 10 years ago, and we focus on uranium mining in Greenland, radioactive waste management in Denmark, and we have an ongoing campaign to try to reform the European treaties in the energy field, including Euratom. I think we're the only green NGO in the Danish kingdom with both Greenlandic and Danish members, although we mainly are located in Copenhagen. So I have a lot of slides, so I will go through them rather quickly. I also should mention that although the main topic is transparency and public participation in Greenlandic radioactive waste management, I think the definition here is rather broad because there is not much radioactive waste management in Greenland because there's still no uranium mining. So the focus is perhaps a little different from the other presentations on transparency and public participation. So what are the issues here? Well, recently began what could actually develop into the biggest trial in the history of the Danish kingdom, and you could also assert that it is already one of the biggest scandals in the history of the Danish kingdom. And with the Danish kingdom, I mean Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. So the situation is this: the Australian mining company, Energy Transition Minerals, is currently demanding approximately 10 billion euros in compensation from the Greenlandic government, and it is also trying to involve the Danish government in the proceedings. So obviously this has accumulated interest far beyond Greenland and the Danish kingdom, because in addition to being the largest court case, it is also related to the kingdom's largest industrial project ever, the Kvanefjeld mining project, which the case is about, contains the second largest deposit of uranium, possibly the largest deposit of thorium, as well as the third largest deposit of rare earth elements in the world. So why was this lawsuit launched? ETM, which has a permit to explore for minerals in Kvanefjeld, has applied to the Greenlandic Department of Mineral Resources to extract uranium and rare earth elements in its license area, but has been refused. And this has already triggered panic in parts of the Danish political community, and could, at least in theory, bring uranium mining back on the political agenda in Greenland. So the big question is, how did it come to this? Well, here we have to look at a little bit on the background. If you, I have brought a map of all the license areas in Greenland on the screen. As you can see, there are currently now 100 active large-scale mining projects, which covers thousands of square kilometers, and they're almost all surface mining projects, often at high altitude in Greenland. And this could actually cause a lot of environmental damage. Greenland has obviously vast mineral and oil and gas resources, and one of the biggest uranium deposits, and by far the biggest thorium deposit in the world, is, as I mentioned, at Kvanefjeld. But there's many other uranium deposits that might have not yet been discovered. and most of the license areas are located in southern Greenland, also here on the map, which has the country's richest biodiversity and all of Greenland's farmland. Regarding the oil and gas deposits, I'm not going to go further into this because it's not really relevant in this presentation. But again, it should be mentioned that Greenland has a lot of these resources, and they are mainly offshore. That is, they are not on land, and it might not be such a big problem, environmentally speaking, in regard to oil and gas, because the recent Greenlandic government has actually banished all oil and gas exploration. So at the time, it's not really an issue. You could actually ask why is this relevant to us? I mean, we are Europeans, and why should we care about what happens in Greenland? And you could argue that this is actually very relevant to us in Europe for two reasons. One is that Greenland might be a candidate for EU membership in a not so distant future. Greenlandic citizens are still European citizens, although Greenland in itself is not a member. Greenland used to be a European member state, but left in 1985, and since then there has been a lot of skepticism, mainly because of the European fishing policies. However, lately skepticism towards the European Union has diminished considerably, and a return cannot be ruled out. It should also be mentioned that Greenland already meets most, if not all, of the criteria for accession, and at the time, EU is by far Greenland's most important trading partner. The second reason why we should definitely take an interest in what happens in Greenland is that the European Union probably is about to outsource much of its mining industry to Greenland. In 2021, Greenland joined the European Raw Materials Alliance, which is a very big network launched by the European Commission. Most of the critical raw materials can be extracted in Greenland, primarily rare earth elements, but also other minerals. So it is quite certain that Europe's focus on Greenland will intensify, which is also manifested in the European Union's new Arctic strategy from 2021. In this strategy, for the first time, the European Union defines itself as an important Arctic stakeholder. So regarding uranium mining, it is interesting to know that two subjects have dominated Greenlandic politics in recent years. One is obviously independence from Denmark, and the second is uranium mining. And the reason is that uranium mining is considered by parts of the political community in Greenland as the quickest way to economic self-sufficiency. and full independence from Denmark. And that is why Greenland's parliament, which is called Inatsisartut, abolished its zero tolerance policy for uranium mining back in 2013, which until that time had lasted a quarter of a century. So when we speak about uranium mining in Greenland and this road to independence from Denmark and economic self-sufficiency, we de facto speak about the Kvanefjeld project, which, as I mentioned, is potentially the biggest industrial project in the history of the Danish kingdom. The project, in fact, started not recently, but half a century ago. But under the ownership of Energy Transition Minerals, this Australian mining company, it has actually been at the forefront of the public eye for more than a decade. And it's not just something that I say. It can actually be demonstrated by the fact that Kvanefjeld and uranium mining in general have been a determining factor in the formation of 6 government coalitions since 2013. New government coalitions were established in 2013, 14, 16, 18, 21, and 22. Here we have a nice picture of Narsaq and Kvanefjeld, the mountain behind Narsaq, which you can see at your right. Narsaq, in the southernmost part of Greenland, is a rather large town, at least by Greenlandic standards. It has 1,500 inhabitants, and it is only located, or rather, it's located less than 8 kilometers from where this open pit mining project is supposed to start at an altitude of 600 meters. And here you can see Narsaq in the middle of this license map, completely surrounded by license areas. The Kvanefjeld license area is the blue spot, just or the blue rectangle just located above this tiny red dot, which is the town of Narsaq. So the problem with the Kvanefjeld project and the reason why it has met so much opposition, not only by Greenlandic NGOs, but also Danish, it's obviously the health and environmental concerns that are related to the project. Here you have a layout of the projected mining project. One of the objections is that in case of a dam break, for instance, and a dam break would obviously happen at the flotation tailings storage facility at Lake Tasik, where you have 2 dams. Actually, if there's a dam break which has occurred I would say at several mining projects all over the world, and an enormous amount of radioactive waste from the mine could actually flood the area. According to one estimate, if all the presently known uranium resources are mined, Kvanefjeld would produce more than double as much radioactive waste as the total mass of uranium mill tailings in Canada and the US put together. This is another reservation, and obviously also an indication of how extremely large the project is. Here we have an overview of the water catchments of the project. And I should mention that according to ETM's own environmental impact assessment report, a dilution factor in the order of 2,000 for the mine's wastewater would be needed to be rendered safe for the most critical parameters. And in more concrete terms, this would mean that it would have to be diluted into 7 cubic kilometer of seawater in the fjords system only in 1 year, and 260 cubic kilometer of seawater during the mine's lifetime, which in the perspective of the environmental impact assessment report is 37 years. And so green NGOs also have concluded that seepage leaks and spills of liquids from the tailings could cause contamination of groundwater and rivers by radioactive and non-radioactive toxic chemical species. This would mean that, for instance, seafood would be contaminated because of the discharges of waste into the fjords and the coastal areas. Just another input on the health and environmental concerns, and that would be dust emissions from this open pit mining project located at a mountaintop at an altitude of 600 meters. The Danish Risø National Laboratory has estimated that up to 1,000 tons of toxic and radioactive dust could be released annually from the open pit mine. And this would mean that people living in the contaminated areas would be chronically exposed to radioactive and other toxic elements via drinking water, food, and air. And it could obviously also affect agricultural activities. So in NOAA and in other green NGOs in Greenland and Denmark, we have concluded that the environmental and climate impact of the Kvanefjeld project, at least in the way that it is described in the environmental impact assessment report, it does not meet the requirements of Greenland's Mineral Resources Act. And this would mean again that the project is in the perspective of Greenlandic law illegal. So there's another interesting aspect to the Kvanefjeld mining project, namely that it's not only located near a town of a reasonably large town, sized by Greenlandic standards, but also near the Kujaata UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And many people think that this site should also include Kvanefjeld, which would mean that you cannot mine there, and that Kvanefjeld's environment would be protected. Such a proposal was put forward by local organizations in 2018, and it was asserted that that Kvanefjeld, because of its very special geological composition, meets a wide range of selecting criteria for nomination to the World Heritage Convention's tentative list. So that might be a future option for Kvanefjeld, who knows? So in regard specifically to transparency and public participation, it would be interesting to look at the Greenlandic mining legislation, which I will not do here because it's it's not that interesting. But I should mention that mining in Greenland is regulated mainly by two acts. The first one is the Mineral Resource Act, and the second one is the Large Scale Projects Act, which gives permission to a company to invite tenders for construction projects. But perhaps it's more interesting that Greenland is not party to the Aarhus Convention, and even though environmental impact assessments are mandatory for large-scale mining projects such as Kvanefjeld, this does not pertain to strategic environmental impact assessments for mineral exploration areas. And this means, in fact, that very few areas in Greenland are excluded in advance from being licensed. And it also means that the public is not informed in advance on what areas could be designated. And one example of how this, of the consequence of this is that since 2021, a mining project has been under development in Greenland's national park, where a Canadian company plans to exploit 12.8 million tons of ore annually. Generally, one could say that mining, and particularly uranium mining, are considered incompatible with the development of Greenland's key economic sectors, which are fishing and catching, tourism, and food production. And as I said, most of the license areas are located in southern Greenland, which is considered Greenland's breadbasket. Here you have all of Greenland's sheep stock, more than 20,000 overwintering sheep, and many people expect that agriculture in southern Greenland could flourish when the generally regrettable effects of global warming sets in. But in Greenland, it would definitely make the climate milder and probably more hospitable, at least for agriculture. You also have some of the best catch areas there. So in many respects, the Kvanefjeld project demonstrates the necessity of a strong legal framework in order to involve the public in the development of large-scale mining projects. As I said, the project started half a century ago, not in Greenland, but in Denmark, where the Danish Nuclear Energy Commission needed a stable fuel supply for Denmark's planned nuclear power program, which in fact did not emerge because of opposition from the public. This mining project was financed primarily by the Danish government, but some of the money also came from the European community, which was also involved, because it was estimated that the uranium deposit at Kvanefjeld at the time comprised 28% of the European community's uranium resources. In Greenland, both the leading government parties, which are Siumut and Inuit Ataqatigiit, were from the beginning against the project. The project was, in fact, off the political agenda for many years, but all this changed back in 2008 when ETM, the mining company, decided that it would not mine only the rare earth elements, but also uranium. And if it was not allowed to do that, it would abandon the project altogether. So where uranium so far had been considered the main deposit, it was now mentioned as a byproduct of the rare earth elements. So in 2013, 10 years ago, the first pro-uranium government in Greenland came into power, and shortly thereafter, the uranium ban was repealed. In her inaugural address, the newly elected Prime Minister Aleqa Hammond promised a consultative referendum in southern Greenland on the Kvanefjeld project, but this was never fulfilled, although Siumut, the government party, stayed in power for the next 8 years. During her tenure, the government proposed amendments to lower the standards of, or rather, during her tenure, the government proposed amendments to the Mineral Resources Act, which aimed to lower procedural environmental standards for all mining. This did not happen, but only because there was an unrelated call for a general election at the time, which prevented the passing of the bill. Also, in regarding to transparency and public participation, 4 information tours were organized in southern Greenland with lectures from mainly from Danish research institutions. They used a lot of their times to rebut the findings of an independent Dutch expert report on the environmental impacts of the Kvanefjeld project, which was commissioned, among others, by NOAA, but also a lot of the NGOs that we cooperate with in Greenland and Denmark. According to this report by this Dutch expert, Storm van Leuven, the project was not environmentally sustainable and threatened the health of the local population. So paradoxically, but not unexpectedly, public confidence quickly diminished after these 4 information tours. And in 2014, an opinion poll showed that only 1 of 10 people in Greenland thought that public participation in this project was satisfactory. Lack of transparency and public participation is not the only problem when you focus on mining and particularly uranium mining in Greenland. Greenland has not ratified United Nations Convention Against Corruption or adopted the standards, measures, and rules that assure that licensing procedures are not manipulated or interfered with. And one of the sad results of this is that there have not been, over the years, firm boundaries between the licensing authority and the mining companies, or proper vetting procedures in place, which takes into consideration a lot of relevant factors. This was the situation for 10 years, but after the new government took office in 2021, at least vetting procedures are now in place. So the lack of these mechanisms has also have had consequences in regard to this mining company, Energy Transition Minerals, which led to that in 2013, the Danish member of parliament for Inuit Ataqatigiit, Johan Lund Olsen, raised the question of the company's ties to organized crimes and its alleged owners' financing of terrorist activities in Somalia in a closed session in the Danish parliament's Foreign Policy Committee. And this was because that rumors to that effect had been circulating in the Australian mainstream press for years. The objective was to get ETM's ownership thoroughly investigated, and the questions were repeated shortly after in Inatsisartut, where the then chairwoman, Sarah Olsvig, asked the same questions. However, neither the Danish nor the Greenlandic government wanted to investigate ETM. In the following years, ETM compromised itself at several occasions, which led to a rebuttal from Greenland's then Prime Minister and the Department of Nature and Environment's permanent secretary. According to these two people, ETM had systematically undermined Greenland's environmental standards, and they actually sent a letter, which you can find on the internet, where they complained that ETM had frequently contacted high-ranking civil servants and ministers who had no competence within the environmental impact assessment review process and seek to undermine the authority of Greenland's Environmental Agency for Mineral Resources. ETM also established close ties to parts of the political community and the civil service. An example of this is that in addition to hiring Greenland's former prime minister as the chairman of its board, the GML also hired two former deputy ministers for mineral resources. In one of these cases, and this is quite extraordinary, according to the Greenlandic newspaper Sermitsiaq, one of these former deputy ministers was provided with stock options potentially worth of 400 million euros by ETM, which corresponds to 3% of the company's share value. And according to some sources, in this case, Bloomberg, which is a very well-respected international publication, ETM may even have been involved in the process that led to the Trump administration's offer to buy Greenland. So all this came to all this culminated, I would say, during what has later been dubbed the Kvanefjeld elections. In December 2020, Greenland's government started public hearings on the Kvanefjeld project, and disagreements over the consultation process caused the government coalition to split up, which then led to elections being called. These elections, for the first time ever, attracted a lot of media interest from all over the world, and a new government was installed, consisted of Inuit Ataqatigiit, which had been against the uranium mining and Kvanefjeld all along, and also the nationalist or perhaps rather populist party Nalleaq. Shortly thereafter, this new government made good on its promise to reinstate the uranium ban, which entered into force in December 2021. And the new government also declared its intention to join the Paris Agreement. But before, or rather, right at the end of these elections, even a bigger scandal, at least by some parameters, emerged. 4 days before the election, Denmark's biggest television station ran a story alleging that the leader of Inuit Ataqatigiit, and later Greenland's prime minister, was criminally corrupt and had abused his power when he served as a cabinet member some years before. This story was obviously repeated by other news media in Greenland and Denmark, and only retracted just after the election. Later, the television station admitted that the story was false and apologized to Moutet, but did not disclose the source of the story. And a couple of months later, the Danish newspaper Berlingske revealed that the story was based on an 11-page press briefing whose origin is still unknown. TV2's news director, who used to work as a political spin doctor for an earlier Danish government, resigned following the incident. When asked directly, EGM denied any involvement, but it was still involved in the election campaign. Independent experts and Greenlandic politicians have later estimated that the campaign definitely had an impact on the election result. The later government party, Inuit Ataqatigiit, was namely only 4 seats from getting absolute majority in the parliament, and therefore had to rely on changing government coalitions after that. So Inuit Ataqatigiit succeeded in reinstating the uranium ban, stopping the Kvanefjeld project, made mining legislation more restrictive, and prohibited convicted criminals from owning or controlling mining companies. They also banned oil and gas exploration and introduced a national biodiversity strategy. But because they did not obtain absolute majority, Greenland is still not has still not joined the Paris Agreement, because there's not a majority for this in the Greenlandic parliament. So very briefly, because I can see we're running out of time, what are the lessons learned here regarding transparency of public participation in Greenland? I think one of the most important lessons that we can learn is that if there's not enough transparency and public participation in the mining sector, and one does not involve civil society, the opposition to this mining from the public is not likely to go away. Instead, things could develop into a major and perhaps, like in Greenland, even a dominating political issue at the national level and transform elections into referenda on mining issues. It is also clear that the transparency and public participation in Greenland would benefit by a ratification of the Aarhus Convention and a stricter interpretation of the Espoo Convention. And things could also improve by adoption of the UN Convention against corruption, because this could help establish firm boundaries between the licensing authority and the mining companies. Vetting of license applicants should be mandatory, and whistleblower protection should be introduced as a tool for fighting corruption and access to relevant information by the public. And last but not least, in regard to large-scale mining projects, local communities should have the right to free, prior, and informed consent, including a right to say no to mining projects. That was it. Thank you, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Thank you very much, Niels. It was a very interesting introduction on the case of Greenland, which is indeed a small inventory member state, but with a large and one of the biggest reserve in uranium, which implies a lot of things ongoing. So I think I saw some, we have a little time, and I saw some questions from Colin. What I would suggest is maybe, Colin, that you can ask the question, one, like some, maybe take one question of of those you ask in the chat, and so that it let the time maybe to others to ask question, and we could continue for those who want to stay, but so that we can stick to the time for those still present. So Colin, please.
Well, I think I think, as I said in the chat, that I think it would be for the Australian mining company to prove that it didn't have an impact on other industries. Clearly, from what you said, Niels, it would have. So I'm a little bit confused here. In the context of the law, presumably the Australian mining company believes it has a case, otherwise it wouldn't have filed it. It also occurs to me, as in the second question, that if you can prove that the stock options were offered and received, then I don't think any court with any semblance of common justice would deny an appeal by the Greenlandic government to say, no, you can't proceed with this. Clearly there's that nobody awards stock options to the tune of that value if there isn't a significant financial gain to be made. Those are the observations I have anyway.
Well, I agree with the observations, Colin. The problem is that it's morally comprehensible, reprehensible, but it's not illegal. The situation was that this Deputy Minister for Mineral Resources, who had also for 10 years been one of the administrative leaders of the push for mining, and especially uranium mining in Greenland. He resigned from his position in the Department for Mineral Resources, I think in May 2020. And the following months, he was hired by Energy Transition Minerals, this mining company, with a very high salary, and also the stock options that was described in my presentation. I mean, this is reprehensible, but it's not illegal because there's no.
I get that bit, Niels. What all I'm trying to suggest is that maybe the Greenlandic government, if it is so against the mining of uranium, should simply pass a law saying, look, if any industry has a detrimental effect on other industries, then that is subject to some sort of review. I mean,
it's a good idea, but the problem is until recently, the political community was split almost 50-50 for and against uranium mining, and there is, I mean, they had bought, if I can use that expression, the mining company had bought some of the leading politicians in parts of this political community, actually by hiring them for the company, even when they had their political, where they held their political positions. But now, I mean, people in Greenland has been fed up with EGM because of all these tricks and attempts of manipulation for the last decade. So I think the tide has turned.
It doesn't have, Greenland doesn't have the financial wherewithal, or indeed, the resources necessary. I mean, I think the population.
No.
The
I mean, if you look at
is only 60,000 Niels, isn't it?
Yeah, if you look at the size, the license map, I mean, there are now at least 100 large-scale mining license areas. Then very few of them are exploration licenses, but almost all of them are exploration licenses, and most of them will not turn out to be anything because of the lack of infrastructure and the high costs of mining in Greenland. But I mean, the administration is still way too small to probably regulate all these enormous mining projects, which some of them could turn out to be. So it is not a good situation for sure. And mining in and also oil and gas exploration in the Arctic is very detrimental to the environment. I mean, the Arctic nature recovers very slowly, if not at all, when it is damaged heavily. So it's a very bad situation for sure.
So how does the Danish government plan to get involved with this, or doesn't it?
They want to get involved as little as possible. I mean, the Denmark's Arctic strategy has two main points. One is to sit at the table as an Arctic superpower, because Greenland is part of the Danish kingdom, so there's a lot of vanity there. And the second is to get the so-called block grants reduced every year. The Danish government subsidizes Greenland to the effect of, I think, 500 million euros. They want to reduce that amount of money by taking a share of the income from the mining industry.
Okay.
So basically, you could say that the Danish government, or rather shifting Danish governments, are pro mining and also pro uranium mining, and they do not regulate the products that might emerge from uranium mining, because I mean, uranium has so-called dual use, which it can be used for military and civil purposes equally, and the Danish government is supposed to take care of the security aspects of uranium mining in Greenland, which they obviously have not done. If you look at the EGM case, I mean, this is a huge scandal beyond measure.
And how is that, just finally on the follow-up question, how is that being portrayed in the Danish press?
The Danish press, or at least the Danish mainstream press, is completely uncritical, and because there's no knowledge of what happens in Greenland. The Greenlandic press, which is very small, is very serious in their coverage of these issues. And my sources are mainly from Greenlandic press. They started being very positive towards mining and uranium mining, but now the, most of the journalists have realized that there is a lot of negative side effects of this.
Yeah.
But Kvanefjeld has been the dominating political issue next to independence from Denmark for the last 10 years, and also this also pertains to the press in Greenland. It's not a big issue in the Danish media.
Okay.
Thanks a
For
lot.
the reasons that Denmark really doesn't want to continue to financially support Greenland, primarily.
I wouldn't say that. No. But I mean, the Danish public is one thing, and the Danish politicians another thing. In Denmark, we are very positive towards Greenland, but on Greenland, the Danish politicians have shown themselves to be generally incompetent in my, and they have caused a lot of problems for themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Niels. Just a question from Gabby regarding the legacy waste from Chuo accident. Do you have a word to say
Yes,
on that?
I mean, this also had an effect on the Greenlandic public. It's now so long time ago that it is not at the forefront of the public memory, so to speak. But I would say that it has more have had an impact on the trust towards American military, but also the Danish authorities, which have been very complacent, I would say, in this regard. And there has also been discussions in Denmark, because most of the so-called Thule workers who were involved in the cleanup came from Denmark, and a lot of them got cancer, and there had been a big discussion in regard to compensation for damages and so on. But this was pretty much the discussion was closed, I would say, 10 or 15 years ago. There's not much because most of the people who were involved are now dead, so it's not a big issue anymore.
Okay, thanks a lot. And with that, unless we have other question, we can close this meeting, and it would be anyway shared, the recording, on the YouTube channel. And if there are questions asked there, I will forward them to you, Niels, or you will even answer yourself on the YouTube channel. So it's to be continued. Thank you very much.
Thank you.